The morning had started like any other for Officer Daniel Hart. The air was crisp, the sun barely rising over quiet neighborhoods, and the only real sound came from the steady rhythm of his boots on the pavement as he walked toward the training field. His two police dogs, Rex and Shadow, trotted beside him with the kind of excitement that always made him smile. They were more than partners. They were family. Rex was the older one, calm and focused, while Shadow was younger, sharp-eyed, and always eager to prove himself. Together, they were the heart of the K-9 search unit, trusted, dependable, and known for always finding what others missed. Daniel didn't know that today would test them in ways none of them had ever imagined. Things shifted the moment they reached the edge of the woods behind the field. It was supposed to be a normal training exercise, nothing intense, just a search and locate drill to keep the dogs sharp. But before Daniel could even give command, Rex suddenly froze. His ears shot up, his entire body tensed, and he stared into the trees with unwavering focus. Shadow mirrored him almost instantly, lowering his head as if he sensed something strange. Daniel felt a small stir of unease. These dogs never reacted this way unless someone needed help. He loosened the leash. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Rex didn't wait. He bolted into the trees with Shadow close behind, moving with a purpose that made Daniel's heart pound. He ran after them, branches brushing against his arms, the sound of paws thudding against the forest floor guiding him deeper and deeper into the woods. Something about the silence made everything heavier. There were no birds, no rustling leaves, just the urgent movement of his dogs pushing forward like they were racing against time. And then he heard it, just for a second, a faint sound, not loud, not clear, almost like a whimper carried through the cold air. Daniel stopped, trying to listen again, but the woods had gone silent. He swallowed hard and pushed on. Rex and Shadow had already surged ahead, following a trail Daniel couldn't see or understand. He trusted them, but a part of him started to feel the weight of something unknown waiting in the shadows. The forest opened into a small clearing, and that's where he saw them. Both dogs were standing completely still, their bodies blocking something on the ground. Their tails were stiff, their heads lowered, as if they were guarding rather than just finding. Daniel walked toward them slowly, his heart thumping against his ribs. He could feel the cold air tighten around him the closer he got. He didn't know what he was about to see, but the dog's behavior told him it wasn't part of any normal day. When he finally reached them, he stopped short. There, beneath the low branches of an old fallen tree, was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 7 or 8, with messy hair and wide, frightened eyes that darted up in the moment he stepped into the clearing. She wasn't hurt, but she was clearly distressed, sitting on the ground with her hands loosely held together with a soft cloth, more like someone had tried to keep her in place rather than harm her. There were no injuries, no signs of struggle, no danger around her, yet something about the scene felt deeply wrong. Rex lowered his head and gently nudged the girl's shoulder, trying to comfort her, while Shadow sat close by, as if guarding her from something unseen. Daniel took a slow breath, lowering himself to the girl's level, keeping his voice soft and steady. "Hey, you're safe now. I'm Daniel. These two troublemakers are Rex and Shadow. Can you tell me your name?" The girl blinked at him, her lips trembling. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She looked terrified, not of him, but of something else. Something she might have seen or something she knew. Daniel reached into his pocket for a small water bottle, offering it to her. She hesitated, then took it with shaky hands. He could see she wasn't injured. She wasn't cold. She wasn't in immediate danger. But she was scared in a way that made him feel the tension spreading through his own chest. "Did someone bring you here?" he asked gently. She swallowed, her eyes filling with tears as she nodded. Just once. A small, fragile movement. Daniel glanced around the clearing. There were no footprints except his and the dog's. No broken branches that suggested anyone running away. No dropped belongings. Nothing. It was as if she had simply appeared out of nowhere. The woods were quiet. Too quiet for comfort. He felt a strange chill run up his spine. "Do you know where your parents are?" he asked. The girl opened her mouth, trying to form words, and finally whispered one shaky sentence. Just 4 soft words that made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. They said stay quiet. The way she said it made Rex shift closer, as if he sensed the fear in her voice. Daniel gently loosened the claw from her wrists. It wasn't tied tightly, just wrapped, almost like someone wanted to keep her from wandering rather than restraining her. It was confusing. Nothing about the situation made sense. He stood up slowly, scanning the trees again. Whoever left her here couldn't have gone far. But why leave a child alone in the woods? Why tell her to stay quiet? And why did she look like she expected something or someone to return? Before Daniel could ask anything else, Shadow suddenly growled. Not a loud, aggressive growl, but a low, cautious rumble that made Daniel's pulse jump. Rex took a defensive stance beside the girl, ears pointed toward the deeper part of the forest, eyes locked onto something Daniel couldn't see. The girl's small fingers clutched Daniel's sleeve. "They're coming back," she whispered. Daniel froze. Every instinct in him sharpened. The forest felt heavier, darker. The dogs stood ready, eyes fixed on the same distant point, as if they sensed movement far beyond human perception. Daniel had no idea who they were, or why they had left a child alone in the woods, or what they wanted. But the girl's trembling voice made one thing painfully clear. This was an accident. And whatever was about to step out from the trees wasn't going to be simple. The air shifted. Leaves rustled. A shadow moved between the trunks. And just as Daniel took one step forward, ready to protect the child, Rex let out a sharp bark. Then everything went silent. Rex's sudden bark echoed through the trees like a warning shot, sharp enough to make Daniel tense from head to toe. The little girl flinched and pressed closer to him while Shadow crouched low, eyes locked on the dark patch of forest in front of them. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The woods stood still, like everything was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence first. Daniel swallowed hard. He didn't draw his weapon. There was no clear threat, and the last thing he wanted was to frighten the child even more. Instead, he gently shifted her behind him, keeping his voice steady even though his pulse was racing. "Stay right here, okay? Rex and Shadow won't let anything hurt you." The girl nodded, though her eyes were fixed on the trees with fearful intensity. She kept her hands close to her chest, almost as if she was afraid someone might pull her away again. Daniel noticed small details he hadn't before. The dirt smudge on her clothes, her shoes slightly wet as if she'd been walking to the woods for a while, and the faint imprint of leaves in her hair. Whoever left her here didn't just drop her off. They moved with her. They watched where she went. But why bring her to such a secluded place? Why leave a child here at all? Another soft rustle snapped him back. Something or someone was definitely nearby, but still hidden. The dogs held their position, noses lifted as they drew in the scents around them. Daniel knew they reacted differently depending on what they sensed. This wasn't how they behaved with wildlife. This was their alert stance, the one they used when a person was close. He called out, raising his voice just enough to travel through the clearing. "Hello? If someone's out there, step forward. We're here to help." His words drifted out unanswered. The only reply was a gentle sway of branches, as if the forest had swallowed his voice whole. Daniel waited. He gave it a few seconds, listening for any trace of movement. But then the sound faded entirely. Whatever, or whoever, was watching had slipped deeper into the trees. Rex's stance softened slightly, though he didn't completely relax. Shadow lifted his head again, sniffing the air, then looked back at Daniel with uncertainty in his eyes. The girl tugged gently on Daniel's sleeve. "Please, don't let them take me again." Daniel knelt beside her, lowering himself so she would feel safer. "I promise you're safe now. But I need to understand what happened so I can help you. Can you tell me anything? Anything at all?" She bit her lip, hesitating. "I can't," they said not to talk. They said it's dangerous. Her voice was tiny, barely rising over the quiet wind. Daniel felt a heaviness settle in his chest. He didn't want to push her, not when she was so afraid. So he nodded softly, deciding to give her time. He reached for his radio to call backup, but before he pressed a button, the girl whispered something that made him stop. "They told me they'd come back if I wasn't quiet." Daniel lowered the radio slowly, not because he believed whoever left her would magically appear if he used it, but because her fear was so real, so immediate. He didn't want to break her fragile trust. He needed to move carefully. "Okay," he said softly. "We'll keep quiet for now, but we're getting you out of these woods. I promise." He stood and motioned for Rex to stay close to her. Shadows circled the clearing once more, ensuring nothing else lurked around them, before returning to Daniel's side. As they began walking, Daniel noticed something strange. The path the dogs led him on earlier had been clear. There were obvious places where branches had been pushed aside, where leaves were disturbed. But now, as he studied the ground more carefully, he realized he couldn't find any obvious footprints at all. Not adult shoes, not the girls, not even signs of someone dragging her or leading her. It didn't make sense. He positioned himself slightly ahead of her, letting the dogs guide the way out. The farther they walked, the more Daniel felt an odd weight in the air, as if the forest was carrying secrets he wasn't meant to uncover. Every crack of a twig made him glance back. Every shift of wind through the branches made the girl tighten her grip on Rex's fur. After a few minutes, Daniel spoke gently again, trying to gather more information without frightening her. "Sweetheart, do you remember how you got here? Even a little bit?" She kept her eyes on the ground as she walked. I was with them, in a car, and then we stopped. They said I had to be good. They said I had to wait." Daniel felt a cold shiver run through him. The phrase "wait" stuck in his mind like a warning. Someone had brought her intentionally. Someone who didn't want her found quickly. Someone who planned something. "Did they say what they were coming back for?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, but they talked about someone. Someone who was close. They didn't want him to find out." Daniel frowned. Someone close? Close to her? Close to them? It could mean anything. He wished the child could give him more, but he also knew she was doing her best. The dogs suddenly stopped again. Daniel looked around, noticing the trees growing denser ahead. This wasn't the way they'd come in. He hadn't led them off track. The dogs had. But why? "Rex?" "Shadow," he murmured. Both dogs stared at a tree just a few feet away. Its bark was scratched, not deeply, but enough to look deliberate. Daniel stepped closer, brushing his fingers over the marks. They weren't animal scratches. They were too straight, too evenly spaced, almost like someone had used a tool or left a signal. "Did you see this before?" he asked the girl. She shook her head quickly, looking pale. "No, but they talk about marks." Daniel's heart started beating faster. Marks. They said they leave marks so they don't get lost. That meant someone had marked multiple trees. Someone familiar with the woods. Someone who expected to come back. Daniel scanned the surrounding trunks more closely. At first, nothing stood out. But then he spotted another one, half hidden behind a cluster of bushes. Same scratches, same shape, same pattern. His mind spun with questions. Were these trails? Warnings? Directions for someone else? He wasn't sure, but each answer he imagined only made the situation feel darker. "We need to keep moving," he said quietly. But as they walked, a strange heaviness settled around them again. The girl's step slowed. Her breathing quickened. Daniel kept reassuring her. But even he could feel something unsettling lingering in the air. When they finally reached a familiar-looking path, he felt a brief wave of relief. They were close to the training field again. A little more walking, and they'd be out of the woods completely. But before he could take another step forward, Shadow stopped dead in his tracks. Rex stiffened beside him, ears forward. The girl's hand slipped into Daniel's, trembling. And then they all heard it. Soft enough to question at first, but gradually growing clearer. Footsteps. Not one set. Several. Slow. Steady. Coming from behind them. Daniel turned slowly, eyes narrowing as he peered into the darkened trees. The footsteps continued. Crunching leaves. Snapping twigs. Moving closer with every passing second. The girl tugged his hand tightly. "It's them," she whispered, her voice quivering. Daniel's breath caught. Rex growled. Shadow's muscles tensed. And somewhere in the forest, hidden among the shadows, the footsteps stopped, as if whoever was out there had been watching them the whole time, and had finally decided to follow. Daniel didn't move. He barely even breathed. The forest had gone still again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It felt like the quiet that comes just before something breaks. Rex and Shadow stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the little girl, their bodies tense, ears pointed toward the shadows where the footsteps had last echoed. Daniel kept her close, feeling her small hand twist into his jacket, as if she was trying to disappear behind him. He scanned the trees slowly, trying to make out any shape or movement. But the forest seemed to swallow everything. The light, the sounds, even his thoughts. Whoever was out there knew how to stay hidden. Whoever they weren't moving anymore. They were watching. A part of Daniel wanted to call backup immediately. Another part hesitated, knowing any loud noise or sudden action might push whoever was out there into doing something unpredictable. He needed to think clearly, even though every instinct screamed for him to run with the child. But the dogs didn't budge, and Daniel trusted their judgment more than his own fear. After several long seconds, he whispered, "Stay behind me. Don't run." The girl nodded, though her eyes were wide and shiny with fear. She kept looking at the trees, as if she already knew exactly who might be hiding there. Daniel took a small step backward. Rex and Shadow mirrored him, keeping a protective barrier between the danger and the girl. He slowly angled their path toward the clearing, hoping to get closer to open ground where it would be harder for someone to hide. The forest floor cracked softly beneath his boots, each sound seeming too loud in the heavy silence. Every step felt like a countdown. Then a sudden crunch echoed from the left. Not directly behind him this time, but farther ahead. Shadow snapped his gaze toward it. Rex let out a low warning bark. The sound hadn't been accidental. Someone was moving, circling them. Daniel tightened his grip around the girl's hand. He whispered, "We're getting out of here now." They moved faster, though still careful, pushing toward the more open part of the woods. But the footsteps followed, not directly behind them, but shifting, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, as if whoever it was didn't want to be seen, but wanted them to know they weren't alone. "Do you know who it is?" Daniel murmured to the girl, keeping his voice low. She didn't answer at first. Her breathing was shaky, uneven. Finally, her voice broke through the trembling. There were two people, not just one. They talked to each other. They said they had to watch me until the right time. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. Right time for what? Her fingers clenched his sleeve. "I don't know, but they kept saying someone was looking for me. Someone who wasn't supposed to." That didn't narrow anything down, but it did deepen the mystery. Were they hiding her from someone? Using her? Protecting her in their own twisted way? Or was it something else entirely? Another rustle. Another crunch. Daniel's mind raced to connect everything. The marked trees, the quiet fear in the girl's voice, the way the forest seemed strangely undisturbed. Nothing fit together yet, and that only made everything feel more threatening. As they reached the slope that led back toward the outer trail, Daniel paused. Rex growled again, not loud, but clear. Shadow's tail stiffened, his gaze fixed on a thick cluster of bushes. Daniel stared hard at the spot. For a moment, he thought he saw something, a flicker of movement, a shadow pulling back. But it vanished too quickly to be sure. He picked up the girl gently. "Hold on to me." She wrapped her arms around his neck without hesitation. He could feel her shaking, but she wasn't crying. Whatever she'd been through had taught her how to stay silent, even when she was terrified. That alone made Daniel's gut twist. He kept walking, taking long but steady steps. The forest seemed to resist, letting them leave. Every few seconds, another sound would shift just behind them. Rex occasionally looked over his shoulder, but he didn't break formation. Shadow stayed slightly ahead, guiding the path. When the woods finally began to thin and the open field appeared between the trees, Daniel felt a small wave of relief rush through him. He tightened his hold on the girl. "We're almost out." But before they reached the clearing, another sound cut through the air, this time not footsteps. A faint whistle. Short, sharp, deliberate. Rex whipped his head around instantly. Shadow let out a sharp bark. Daniel stopped dead. The girl went rigid in his arms. The whistle didn't come again. But the meaning was clear. Someone was signaling. Someone who wasn't worried about hiding anymore. Someone who wanted them to hear it. Daniel took off at a steady run, not looking back. He kept his pace controlled so he wouldn't slip, but he didn't stop until the forest opened fully into the wide training field. Only then did he turn around. Nothing moved between the trees. No shadows shifted. No figure stepped forward. But Daniel knew they were still there, watching. He set the girl down gently in the middle of the field, kneeling so he was eye level with her. "You're safe out here. Nobody's gonna take you from this spot." She nodded but looked back toward the trees. "They don't stop," she murmured. "They always watch." Daniel took a slow breath, thinking. He reached for his radio again, ready to call in help now that they were out of the woods. But before he pressed a button, the girl spoke again. "There was another man," she whispered. "Not like them. I think he was the one they were hiding me from." Daniel paused. "Do you know who he is?" She shook her head. "But they said he was close. Too close. They sounded scared of him." Daniel hesitated. This added a new twist he hadn't expected. They were scared of him, not the other way around? "Yes." Her eyes lifted slowly to his. "They said he's dangerous." Dangerous. Daniel didn't like the way the word lingered in the air. He didn't know who this man was, or why anyone would need to keep a child away from him. But the fear in her voice wasn't imagined. She believed it. And the two people who took her believed it too. Shadow barked suddenly, pulling Daniel from his thoughts. Rex stood beside him, ears up again, staring at the tree line. And then Daniel saw it. A figure, only for a second, standing deep in the shadows of the forest. Too far to make out details. But tall, still, watching. The moment Daniel focused on him, the figure stepped back, swallowed again by the darkness between the trees. The girl grabbed his hand tightly. "That's the other one," she whispered. "The one they were scared of." Daniel's breath caught. Because whoever that shadowy figure was, he hadn't run. He hadn't hidden. He had simply watched them escape the woods. Almost like the whole thing had been allowed. Daniel stared at the tree line long after the dark figure vanished, waiting for even the smallest hint of movement. But the forest had gone completely still again, as if whatever stood there dissolved into the shadows the moment it realized it had been seen. Rex and Shadow stayed alert, their bodies angled protectively toward the girl, their eyes never leaving the woods. The air felt heavy, too heavy for an open field. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. The girl stayed close beside Daniel, clinging to his hand like he was the only thing anchoring her to safety. Her breathing was uneven, but she didn't cry. She just kept watching the trees, the same direction Daniel watched, as though she expected someone to step out again at any second. "We need to get inside," Daniel finally said, keeping his voice low but steady. He didn't want her to feel his fear. "Come on. The station's just across the lot." Shadow started forward, without needing a command. Rex remained a moment longer, scanning the woods, before slowly backing up to stay beside them. It was unusual behavior, even for a trained police dog. Rex didn't retreat unless a threat had weight. As they crossed the training field, Daniel's thoughts raced faster than his steps. The girl had been left in the woods intentionally. Two people had been watching her. And somewhere deeper in the forest, a third person, the one the others feared, had been standing still, observing all of them. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Inside the small operations building beside the training grounds, Daniel locked the door, lowered the blinds, and guided the girl to a bench. She sat quietly, arms wrapped around herself. She looked so small in the sterile room, too small for the weight of whatever she'd been caught up in. Daniel crouched in front of her again. "You're safe here, okay? Nobody can get inside." She nodded, though her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. "They're not supposed to come here," she whispered softly, almost like she was saying it to herself. Daniel reached out gently. "Who told you that?" "The two people who were with me. They said the man who was looking for me wouldn't get this close to a police place." Daniel's blood chilled. "They said he was afraid of police?" "No," she murmured. "They said he's careful." That was somehow worse. Before Daniel could ask more, Rex suddenly lifted his head and growled softly. Shadow joined him a moment later. They weren't looking at the door, They were looking at the window. Daniel moved quickly to peek through the blinds. Nothing, just the empty field. But the dogs didn't relax, even after he stepped away. He grabbed his radio. "This is Officer Hart at the K9 field building. I need backup immediately. Unknown individuals in the woods, possibly armed. Secure all exits to the property." He waited for the reply, but the radio crackled strangely, like static was cutting through the signal. That had never happened here before. "Repeat," Daniel said, tapping the side. "Dispatch, do you copy?" Silence. He tried again. Still silence. Then the girl whispered. "They said he has things that make calls not work." Daniel looked at her sharply. "What things?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but they said he could block anything if he wanted." That meant whoever the third man was, he was prepared, trained, someone who understood how to avoid being traced, and he knew exactly where they were. Daniel's heartbeat kicked up. He had no way of knowing how close the man was now or what he wanted with the girl. But one thing was clear. This wasn't random. This wasn't an accident. There was a plan behind all of it, a plan Daniel had just stepped into without understanding the depth of it. Shadow walked to the door and sniffed under crack. His tail stiffened. Rex joined him, pressing his shoulder against the wood, as if bracing against something he sensed outside. Daniel signaled him to step back and turn the lock again just in case. The girl watched the dogs, worry growing in her eyes. "They never did that before," she said quietly. "Do what?" Daniel asked. "Act scared." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't want to tell her that he had seen the same thing in their behavior through the woods. Police dogs weren't supposed to be afraid. They weren't afraid of danger. They ran toward it. But whatever they sensed now wasn't normal danger. It was something they couldn't understand, something unpredictable. Daniel knelt beside Rex and placed a hand on his neck. "Easy, boy. We're okay. We're all okay." Rex didn't fully relax, but he softened at Daniel's voice. For a moment, things felt still again until another sound drifted through the room. A soft click. It came from the hallway. Daniel froze. It wasn't loud, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. A door latch somewhere inside the building shifting. He motioned the girl behind the bench. "Stay low. Don't make a sound." Her breathing quickened, but she nodded and crawled into the narrow space. Shadow crept toward the hallway door, muscles tight. Rex stayed beside Daniel, ready for whatever would happen next. Another click. Closer this time, like someone testing each door as they walked through the hallway. The operations building wasn't large. There were only a few rooms. Whoever was inside would reach their door within seconds. Daniel moved to the wall beside the entrance, out of immediate sight. He could feel his own pulse thudding in his ears. He hadn't seen anyone approach from outside. He hadn't heard footsteps on the gravel. Someone had entered silently or had already been inside the building. The girl pressed her hands over her mouth to keep herself quiet. Her eyes were wide, terrified, pleading. Shadow's claws tapped lightly on the floor as he shifted his stance. His body trembled, not in fear but anticipation. Then the hallway door handle turned. Slowly, carefully, as if whoever was on the other side wanted to test whether the room was locked. Daniel held his breath. The handle turned again, firmer this time. Rex growled deep in his throat. Shadow bared his teeth. The handle twisted a third time and stopped. Then a voice, soft, low, and unsettlingly calm, spoke through the crack of the door. "You shouldn't have taken her." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. The girl's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head violently, mouthing no, no, no. "Open the door," the voice said again. "She belongs with me." Rex lunged at the door, barking violently. Shadow followed, throwing his weight against it. The door held, but just barely. The man on the other side didn't flinch. His voice came again, even quieter, almost emotionless. "You have no idea what you've interfered with." Daniel steadied himself, backing the girl farther into the corner, because whoever stood on the other side of that door wasn't just looking for her. He believed she was his, and he wasn't going to walk away, not without a fight. Rex's furious barking shook the door, echoing through the small room, but the man on the other side didn't react. Not a flinch, not a shuffle, just silence. A silence so controlled it made the hairs on Daniel's arms rise. Whoever he wasn't afraid of two trained police dogs ready to break through the door to protect the girl. That alone told Daniel everything he needed to know. This wasn't someone ordinary. This wasn't someone making a mistake. This was someone who believed he had a right to be here, and he believed the girl belonged to him. Daniel steadied his breathing, keeping one hand near the girl's shoulder so she'd know he was still there. Her small body trembled against the wall, but she didn't make a sound. She hadn't made a sound since the man spoke. It was like the sound of his voice alone had frozen her. Then came a second noise, light footsteps in the hallway, but not from the man at the door. These were softer, faster, stopping just behind him. The man's voice lowered. "Stay back." Daniel stiffened. There was someone else with him. Rex barked again, furious and ready, and Shadow moved to block the girl completely, pressing himself between her and the door. The second set of footsteps hesitated. "I said stay back," the man repeated, this time sharper. Daniel's mind raced. The two people who had originally been with the girl, were they out there? Had they found this man? Or was this someone entirely new? Then a different voice spoke, this one shaky, breathless, and much younger. "Please don't do this. She's not supposed to be here anymore." Daniel felt the tension twist inside him. A second voice, a scared voice, a voice that didn't sound threatening at all. The girl's eyes widened. She whispered, That's the lady from the car." Everything inside Daniel froze. The woman who had been watching her, the one who had tied her up in the woods, the one who had told her not to talk. She was here. She was right outside the door. Why would she be following the man she feared? The man's voice dropped to a cold whisper. "If you had done what I said, we wouldn't be in this mess." I tried," the woman stammered, "but she wanted to run. She kept looking for a way out. She wasn't safe with us anymore." The girl pressed her palms to her ears, squeezing her eyes shut. Daniel leaned toward her gently. "It's okay. You don't have to listen. Stay down." But she shook her head. "I know her voice," she whispered, barely audible. "She wanted to help me, but she couldn't." Daniel's thoughts tangled. If the woman had wanted to help her, why leave her tied up? Why hide her in the forest? Why follow this dangerous man? Outside, the woman spoke again, this time stepping closer. "Please, let's leave. The police will be here soon. We shouldn't be inside with them." Daniel reached for his radio instinctively, but the static returned, harsh and sharp. The man chuckled softly, not amused, irritated. "They can't reach anyone, and no one is coming." Daniel felt the room shrink around him. Whoever this man was, he wasn't guessing. He knew exactly how to cut off communications. Rex barked again, ears pinned forward, teeth showing. Shadow braced his stance even harder. The man leaned closer to the door. Daniel could hear the subtle shift of his boots against the floor. "She belongs with me," he repeated. "Step aside and I'll leave quietly." Daniel didn't respond. He angled himself between the girl and the door, his breath even though fear tightened his ribs. "You're not taking her," he said. Another soft laugh came from the other side, almost pitying. "Do you even know who you're protecting?" Daniel didn't move. The man continued. "Do you know why those two took her away? Why they hid her in the woods? Why they were scared to be near her?" The woman suddenly whispered harshly, "Stop. He doesn't need to know anything." But the man ignored her. "She didn't just run from them. Daniel, they ran from me." Daniel felt a cold shiver shoot down his spine. He hadn't told the man his name. The girl hadn't said it out loud. No one else had spoken it. The man shouldn't have known. Daniel whispered to the girl, "Do you know him? Did he ever speak to you before today?" She shook her head quickly. "No, they talked about him, but I never saw him." "But he knows your name," Daniel murmured. She pressed herself into the corner. They said he was looking for someone. Not me, someone else. But then he said I could help him find them." Daniel's stomach dropped. So she wasn't the real target. She was leverage. Outside, the man sighed, almost impatient now. "We don't have time for this. Hand her over. She's the only connection I have left. The only connection left? To what? To who? Daniel's mind raced through possibilities, but nothing clicked into place. Then, before Daniel could speak again, something unexpected happened. The woman's voice rose, shaking, frightened but firm. No, she doesn't go with you. The man's voice stopped completely. Daniel pressed closer to the door, listening sharply. The woman continued, breath trembling. If you take her, everything starts again. And I can't let that happen. For the first time, Rex paused mid-growl, sensing the shift in tone. The girl whispered, "She wanted to protect me." Shadow turned his head slightly, as if picking up on her words. But the man's tone changed, sharp, dark, filled with quiet danger. "Step away from the door." "No," the woman said. Daniel could almost feel the tension spike in the hallway. A single heartbeat of silence passed. Then a loud thud at the wall just outside, making the girl jump, and the dog snapped back into defensive mode. The woman yelped. Something scraped across the floor. Daniel pressed his back against the door, bracing his weight. "Rex! Shadow! Get ready!" The dogs lowered into a stance Daniel had seen only a few times in their careers, when things were about to turn. The girl whispered shakily, "He's hurting her. He's mad." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The fear in her voice already said everything. The woman cried out again, muffled this time. Then came the twist. A heavy, controlled breath from a man, followed by a sentence that made Daniel's skin crawl. "You should have told me earlier. He's here." Daniel froze. "He's here? Who was he?" The man continued, his voice laced with tension and urgency neither Daniel nor the girl had heard before. "He found us." The girl's eyes widened. "He," she whispered. "But they said he wasn't real." Daniel's pulse spiked. Another person? Someone worse than the man at the door? Someone all of them feared? A second plot neither Daniel nor the audience had seen was unfolding, one that suggested a threat far beyond the building, and far beyond the man demanding the girl. And then, outside the building, somewhere in the direction of the dark forest, a deep, resonant sound echoed. Not footsteps, not a voice, something else. Something that made Shadow whimper for the first time in his life. Daniel's heart pounded so hard he was sure the girl could hear it. Outside, the forest seemed to shiver with the same tension that filled the room. The dogs, alert and growling, were the only barrier between them and whatever threat lurked beyond the walls. The man at the door's voice had dropped to a cold whisper again. "He's here," he repeated. "And this time there's no turning back." Daniel pressed himself against the door, trying to steady his nerves. "Who's here?" he demanded. "What are you talking about?" The man didn't answer. Instead, the door rattled with a sudden force. Someone had rammed it from the other side. The girl screamed and pressed herself against Daniel, her tiny arms clinging tightly to him. Rex lunged forward, teeth bared, while Shadow barked fiercely, their instincts pushing them into protective mode. Suddenly, the door burst open. A figure stepped inside, not the man they had been facing. This one moved with shocking speed and authority. The man at the door froze, a look of disbelief crossing his face. It was a tall, imposing figure wearing a police tactical uniform, but with a calmness in his eyes that betrayed experience. "Daniel Hart," the newcomer called, voice steady but urgent. "Stand down. We have the situation under control." Daniel barely had time to react before the man took control of the room, signaling the dogs to calm. Rex hesitated, growling low, but then relaxed under command. Shadow also stopped, watching the new figure closely. The girl looked up, confusion and relief mixing in her wide eyes. Who are you?" she whispered. The newcomer knelt in front of her, voice gentle. "I'm here to make sure you're safe. No one is going to hurt you now." Daniel's mind raced. He glanced at the man at the door, who now backed toward the hallway, realizing his advantage had evaporated. The newcomer moved swiftly, restraining him before he could make another move. Within seconds, the woman who had been outside the building stepped inside, unharmed but shaken. "She's safe now," the woman said softly, nodding toward the girl. "We were trying to protect her from him." from everything he represents. Daniel's pulse began to slow slightly as the reality sank in. The girl had never been in danger from the people who had tied her up in the woods. They had been protecting her all along. The man at the door, the one who had seemed so threatening, was part of a bigger threat, someone who had been hunting her, and anyone trying to shield her, for reasons no one in the room fully understood yet. The girl clutched Daniel's hand. They said he was dangerous, that he was looking for someone. Was that true? Daniel nodded gently. Yes, but you're safe now. The newcomer looked at Daniel, then at the restrained man. This is a third member of the group. He's been tracking her because she holds information about a case bigger than anyone realizes. Daniel's stomach dropped. Bigger? Then what? Before he could ask, the restrained man snapped his head toward the girl, his voice trembling with anger and fear. You don't understand. She's the key. You don't know what she knows. The girl blinked, frightened but steady. I don't know anything. Daniel looked at her reassuringly. You don't have to. That's why we're here. The tension in the room felt like it might shatter at any second, but then the newcomer spoke calmly, his presence commanding everyone's attention. We'll handle it. She will not be harmed. Everyone else will answer for their actions. For the first time since the chaos began, Daniel allowed himself to breathe. The immediate danger was over. The girl was safe. The dogs pressed close to him, tails wagging slightly as if sensing the release of tension. Then, just as relief started to settle in, the girl pointed toward the window. Look! Daniel followed her gaze. In the far tree line, a shadow shifted. Not the man at the door, not the restrained intruder. Something, or someone, was moving deeper in the forest, and this figure seemed to be watching them. The newcomer noticed it too. His face tightened, a flicker of concern crossing his features. This isn't over, he said quietly. He's still out there. Daniel's heart raced again. The forest seemed darker now, almost alive, as if it were hiding more secrets. The girl's eyes widened. He's still looking for me, she whispered. Daniel pulled her closer. Not today, he said firmly, though a chill ran down his spine. Rex nudged the girl gently, as if understanding her fear, and Shadow growled low, eyes fixed on the distant trees. The newcomer moved to the window, peering into the forest. We've only delayed him, he said, voice low. The real danger isn't gone. He knows more than we think, and he'll be back. But for now, she's safe with us. The girl hugged Daniel's arm tightly, and for a moment, everything seemed to settle. The immediate threat had passed. The dogs relaxed slightly. The intruders were restrained. The girl was protected. Then, just as Daniel thought they could finally breathe, the radio crackled to life. A distorted voice came through, low and menacing. She's not yours. She never will be. I'm closer than you think. Daniel froze. The forest outside the window rustled ominously. The newcomer's jaw tightened. The restrained man hissed something unintelligible. The girl's eyes went wide, fear flashing across her face. And in that moment, Daniel realized the fight wasn't over. Not even close. The climax had passed. The girl was safer now, but the shadow of the real threat remained. Somewhere out there, the true danger was watching, waiting, and ready to strike again. And this time, they might not get a second chance. Rex growled low, Shadow barked, and Daniel clenched his fists, knowing one thing for certain. This story was far from finished. The forest had more secrets, and the people who wanted the girl weren't done revealing theirs. Then, just as he turned to check on her again, the girl whispered, almost to herself, "He knows where we are, because I led him here." Daniel's blood ran cold. The twist hit him like a shockwave. The girl wasn't just a victim. Somehow, unknowingly, she had become part of the connection to the very danger they were trying to escape. And now, the Rayall chase had begun. Daniel's mind raced as he processed the girl's words. She had unknowingly revealed her location, but it wasn't malicious. It was fear, confusion, and the instinct to act. The newcomer, the one in tactical uniform, moved quickly to calm both the girl and the situation. "We'll handle it," he said firmly. "She didn't know. None of this is her fault." Daniel knelt beside the girl again, holding her hands gently. "It's okay. You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "We're going to keep you safe. That's all that matters now." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks, and finally allowed herself to relax against his shoulder. The tension that had gripped the room for hours started to ease just slightly. Rex and Shadow pressed close to the girl, their presence a steadying force, their loyalty unwavering. They had been her guardians through every twist of this terrifying ordeal, and now their calm energy began to sink into her, giving her the courage to breathe again. The newcomer turned back to the restrained man and the woman. "We'll take it from here," he said. "You're going to answer for everything. She's going to be safe." The woman's hands shook, relief washing over her face. "I just want to make sure she didn't get hurt," she whispered. Daniel nodded. He understood her completely. In the chaos, it had been difficult to separate threat from protection, friend from enemy. But now, as the immediate danger receded, clarity began to emerge. Outside, the forest remained quiet, though the shadow of the unknown threat still lingered in everyone's minds. The girl's revelation, that she had inadvertently led the dangerous man closer, added a bitter edge to the victory. But it didn't diminish the fact that she was safe, and that the men who had been manipulating her had been neutralized for now. The newcomer guided the restrained man out of the room, and Daniel watched him go. Questions about who the man really was, and what he had been searching for, still hovered in the air. But they were questions for another time. The girl's immediate safety came first, and that clarity gave Daniel a sense of calm he hadn't felt in hours. He turned back to the girl, who was now wiping her tears with the back of her sleeve. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Not really. I just want to be somewhere safe." Daniel smiled softly. "We'll get there, but you were incredibly brave. You stayed calm when things got really scary." The girl looked down at Rex and Shadow, who were now relaxed, tails wagging slightly. They saved me," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "They did, and you helped them, too. You listened, you stayed with us, and you trusted us even when you were scared. That's how we got through this." For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't full relief yet. It would take time, but it was a start. Later, when backup arrived and the restrained men were taken into custody, Daniel stayed with the girl until she could be safely placed with protective services. The officers ensured that the girl would be cared for, watched over, and given every opportunity to heal from the trauma she had endured. It wasn't just a matter of safety. It was a chance to rebuild trust in the world, to regain the sense of security she had lost. Daniel watched as she waved goodbye to Rex and Shadow, her little hands patting them gently. The dogs leaned into her touch, their loyalty and love evident in every movement. For a moment, Daniel realized the profound bond between human and dog, and how essential it had been to saving her. Without them, she might not have survived this ordeal. As the girl was led to protective officers, Daniel reflected on the events. The twist of her inadvertently revealing their location had made everything more dangerous, but it also reinforced an important lesson. Fear can cloud judgment, but courage and trust can guide you through even the darkest moments. The forest had been a maze of shadows and uncertainty, but their unity had allowed them to navigate it. He turned to the newcomer, who was checking the perimeter to ensure no further threats lingered. "Thank you," Daniel said simply. "I don't know what we would have done without you." The man nodded. "It's all about keeping people safe. That's the goal. Today we succeeded." Daniel glanced at the two dogs, sitting calmly now, heads lifted, alert but relaxed. He knelt beside Rex, running a hand along his thick neck. "You were amazing," he murmured. Shadow leaned into his hand as well, both dogs' eyes filled with an intelligence that seemed to acknowledge everything they had been through. As the sun began to set over the training field, Daniel allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The girl was safe. The immediate threats had been neutralized, and the dogs, his loyal partners, had performed beyond expectation. But the forest, the shadows, and the distant echo of threats still lingered in his mind. The world could be unpredictable, dark, and dangerous, yet courage and partnership could illuminate even the most frightening situations. In the days that followed, the girl settled into a safe home under protective supervision. with regular visits from Daniel and the K-9 unit. Slowly, she began to regain her sense of normalcy, her laughter returning in small, careful steps. Rex and Shadow became her constant companions during these visits, a tangible reminder that loyalty, love, and bravery could overcome fear. Daniel used the experience to reflect on his role as an officer, a protector, and a guide through chaos. He realized that the true danger wasn't always a visible threat. It was a hidden one, the fear and uncertainty that could overwhelm anyone. But the story also proved that even in moments of extreme danger, the bond between humans and animals, the courage to act, and the willingness to trust could make the impossible possible. Months later, Daniel returned to the field, walking Rex and Shadow through the now quiet woods. The memories of that day were vivid, but the field was peaceful, sunlight filtering through the trees. He allowed himself a small smile. They had faced darkness, uncertainty, and a real threat, yet they had prevailed. And the girl, though forever changed by the events, had survived, grown stronger, and learned that trust and bravery could guide her through anything. As he reached the edge of the woods, Daniel paused, glancing back one last time. A faint rustle in the trees caught his attention, but it was just the wind, moving leaves like shadows dancing in the sunlight. He took a deep breath and continued, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly. The story had reached its resolution. The girl was safe, the threat neutralized, and the bonds forged in that crisis had left a lasting impact on everyone involved. But the experience had also left a reminder. Danger could emerge from unexpected places, and courage often came in the form of those who refused to abandon others in their darkest moments. Daniel looked down at Rex and Shadow, their heads high, proud and attentive. "We did good," he said softly. The dogs nudged his hands gently, their silent acknowledgement a reward greater than words. And as they walked off the field together, Daniel reflected on the truth at the heart of the story. Fear can be powerful, but trust, loyalty, and courage are stronger. Even in the most terrifying situations, these qualities could guide people and animals through darkness into safety, leaving hope in their wake. The forest behind them remained quiet, a reminder of what had happened, and a symbol of the unknown dangers that could emerge at any time. But for now, the story had a happy ending. The girl was safe. The dogs had proven their worth. And Daniel, standing tall among his loyal partners, knew that they had faced the impossible and survived. The echoes of fear might linger, but courage, love, and loyalty had triumphed. And sometimes that was all it took to change everything.